My name is Ellie and I am 22. And sometimes, when I think back to the day of my graduation, I still feel that same quiet heaviness in my chest, the kind that settles when a moment that's supposed to be beautiful becomes something you just want to forget. I remember waking up that morning with a strange mix of excitement and nervousness, the kind of feeling you get when you finally reach a milestone you've been dreaming about for years. I had worked hard for that degree. I had stayed up nights studying, juggling part-time jobs, taking buses across town when I couldn't afford rides, and pushing through moments when I genuinely felt like giving up. And somewhere deep down, I kept telling myself that even if my family didn't always notice my efforts, they would at least show up on that one important day. I didn't grow up in a family that celebrated my achievements. Attention was usually reserved for my younger brother, Noor, who was the so-called golden child. He played sports, and every game he had was treated like some national event. My parents would clear the entire weekend just to sit on cold bleachers cheering for him, even if he spent most of the game on the bench. But whenever I had something meaningful happening in my life, school awards, small performances, or even when I got into college, the reactions were flat, like they were hearing about something that didn't concern them. Still, despite everything, a part of me believed that graduation was different. It wasn't some small thing. It was the kind of moment you looked back on for years, the kind of milestone families talked about proudly. So that morning, I put on my black gown carefully, checking myself in the mirror again and again, trying to picture the look on my parents' faces when they would see me walk the stage. I imagined my mother smiling for once, maybe even taking pictures. I imagined my father patting my shoulder, saying he was proud. I imagined Noah teasing me, but in a good way, the way siblings sometimes do when they're secretly impressed. Holding on to that hope was probably my mistake. I left the house early, partly because I had to be on campus, but also because I didn't want to sit around waiting for them to get ready. I sent a message in our family group chat around 9 a.m., telling them what time the ceremony started and where they could meet me afterward. No one replied, but I told myself they were probably busy getting dressed or driving. I reached the auditorium 2 hours before the ceremony, because graduates had to line up early. The place was buzzing with excitement. Students fixing their caps, parents holding flowers, siblings arguing about seats, grandparents taking pictures of absolutely everything. Every corner was filled with laughter, hugs, and that warm feeling of celebration. I kept scanning the crowd, even though they weren't supposed to arrive yet. I just wanted to catch a glimpse of them, maybe see them walking in together, maybe hear my mom calling my name. But time kept passing, and as the ceremony got closer, the hopeful excitement inside me began shrinking quietly. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, unlocking it, locking it again, trying not to look desperate. At some point, one of my classmates, Jenna, walked up to me with her parents. They were all smiling, carrying balloons and flowers, and her mom hugged her like she had just won the Nobel Prize. I smiled back politely, congratulated her, and watched them walk away, feeling something faint but sharp twisting inside me. When we were finally told to line up, I felt my stomach tighten. My family still hadn't shown up or texted. I kept telling myself they must be stuck in traffic, or maybe they couldn't find parking. I wanted to believe anything except the possibility that they simply didn't bother. Then, just minutes before I was supposed to walk on stage, my phone buzzed. I grabbed it instantly, thinking it had to be them. It was a message from my mother. For a moment, I felt relief. But the second I opened it, that feeling dissolved like it had never been there. She wrote, "We decided to go to your brother's game. Graduations are boring. You can handle it on your own." That was it. No apology, no explanation, not even a good luck. Just a casual dismissal, as if my graduation was some chore I had asked them to help with. I stared at the screen for a long moment, unable to blink, unable to breathe. The noise around me faded into a muffled blur. It was like the ground under my feet shifted just a little, enough to make me feel off balance. I felt this strange numbness spread through me. Not anger yet, not sadness, just a silent, empty space where something important used to be. In that moment, something inside me clicked. I didn't cry. I didn't send a reply. I didn't even let myself think too much because if I started, I wasn't sure I would stop. Instead, I took a slow breath, put my phone in my pocket, and walked forward when my row was called. When my name echoed through the auditorium, I walked across the stage with a steady pace, smiling like nothing was wrong, like my world wasn't quietly cracking. People clapped, cameras flashed, and somewhere in the distance someone cheered. But none of it belonged to me. None of it was for me. I was just another name on a long list. Another student finishing their degree while their family cheered proudly from the seats. Except my seat was empty. After the ceremony, when graduates ran to their families and wrapped them in hugs, I walked alone to a quiet corner near the fountain. I took off my cap, sat down, and watched everyone around me celebrate. It didn't hurt immediately. It was more like a steady realization slowly settling into place. I wasn't going to keep trying to earn love that was never offered. I wasn't going to keep begging for a place in a family that never made space for me. That day, sitting by that fountain with my gown draped over my lap, I made the decision that would change everything. I would leave. Not just the house, not just the city. I would leave their world completely, change my name, disappear, start over somewhere I wasn't the forgotten child in the background. And for the first time in my life, the thought didn't scare me. It felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater too long. That was the moment my calm revenge began, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. In the days after graduation, everything around me felt strangely quiet, as if the world had slowed down just enough for me to hear my own thoughts clearly for the first time in years. I still lived in the same house with my family at that point, but something inside me had shifted permanently. I moved through the rooms with a kind of calm detachment, like I was already drifting away from the place even though my body was still there. My parents didn't ask about the ceremony. They didn't ask how it went, didn't ask to see pictures, didn't mention the message they sent. It was as if my graduation had never existed in their world. That silence didn't surprise me, but it still left a quiet ache in places I didn't want to examine too closely. My brother, Noor, came home the evening after his game, bragging loudly in the living room about a goal he apparently didn't even score. It was more of an accidental assist, but to him it was heroic. My parents listened as if he had brought home a trophy made of diamonds. I watched them from the hallway for a while and noticed, as usual, standing there with my folded gown still in my arms because I had nowhere else to put it. For a moment, I wondered if I should at least tell them I graduated, if maybe hearing me say the words out loud would trigger something inside them. But then I remembered the message, the bluntness of it, the dismissal, and I simply turned around and went back upstairs. That night, while everyone else slept, I opened my laptop and started researching how to legally change a name, what paperwork it required, how long it took, and what steps I would need to disappear without leaving an obvious trail. I didn't want drama. I didn't want a big scene. I didn't want them chasing after me out of guilt or obligation. I just wanted a clean break, a quiet exit, the kind of departure that leaves no echo behind. I knew that if I stayed, I would keep shrinking myself to fit into the small space they allowed me to occupy. I would keep hoping for things they were never going to give. I was tired of hoping. Over the next few weeks, I started preparing quietly. I saved every paycheck from my part-time job. I sold some things online, textbooks, clothes I didn't wear anymore, old electronics. I even sold the graduation cap and gown, because seeing them hanging in my closet felt like carrying around a bruise that someone kept pressing. I deleted old social media accounts and created new ones under a different name. Names I tried on like outfits until one of them finally felt like it belonged to the version of me I wanted to become. I didn't tell my friends what I was planning either. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I needed this to be mine. I needed a fresh beginning without the expectations or memories tied to the person I used to be. One evening, while I was sitting on my bed sorting documents, I heard my parents arguing. They weren't fighting about me, of course. They rarely did. It was something about Noah or wanting a new laptop before the school year started. My mother insisted he needed it to stay ahead, and I listened quietly, thinking about how I had gone through 4 years of college with a second-hand laptop that overheated whenever I tried to write more than 2 pages. I wasn't jealous anymore. I was simply exhausted. I realized that whatever energy I had spent trying to make them see me had drained out of me entirely. The next morning, I told my parents I wanted to take a short trip to clear my head after graduation. They barely reacted. My mom said, "Just don't be gone too long. Your brother has playoffs coming and will need help around the house," as if I were some kind of backup tool they could pull out only when convenient. My father just nodded without looking up from his phone. That tiny moment made the decision easier. I packed lightly, just a small suitcase with a few clothes, essential documents, and some cash I had withdrawn over time. I didn't want to take too much because I didn't want questions if they happened to look through my things. Then, early one morning, before the sun came up, I quietly wheeled the suitcase out the front door. I paused for a moment by the living room, looking at the dark furniture, the family pictures on the wall that barely had me in them, the house that held so many memories, but also so many empty spaces where love should have been. And then I stepped outside. I didn't feel fear. I felt something much simpler, relief. The bus ride to the city, where I planned to start over, was long, giving me too much time to think. But surprisingly, the thoughts weren't painful. I stared out the window, watching the scenery change from small neighborhoods to wider highways, from familiar streets to places I had never seen. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a background character. I felt like someone writing her own story. When I reached my destination, I checked into a small rented room that I had arranged in advance. It wasn't fancy, just a single bed, a tiny kitchen area, and a small window facing a street that never seemed to quiet down. But it was mine. Every corner of it belonged to me. I spent the first few days just adjusting, grocery shopping, walking around the neighborhood, learning the bus routes. I filed for the name change paperwork and waited for the approval process to begin. While waiting, I looked for jobs, eventually landing one at a small cafe a few blocks away. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to start building a life. The owners were kind in a way I wasn't used to, always asking how my day was going, always noticing when I looked tired or stressed. It surprised me how strange it felt to be treated like a person whose feelings mattered. Slowly, I started settling into my new identity. I practiced signing my new name again and again until it felt natural. I bought a new phone number, set up new accounts, and built a routine that didn't involve tiptoeing around people who barely acknowledged my presence. I didn't contact my family, and for a long time, they didn't contact me either. Weeks turned into months, and the distance between us grew into something solid and unbreakable. I imagined they were busy with Noah's games, busy with their own world, where I had always been more of a shadow than a daughter. Sometimes I wondered if they even noticed I was gone, or if they just assumed I was upstairs in my room, doing what I always did, taking care of my life quietly, without bothering anyone. But I didn't let those thoughts pull me back. I had new things to focus on. I improved my skills at the cafe, eventually helping with bookkeeping and scheduling. The owners trusted me. My coworkers trusted me. It felt like the beginning of a life where I didn't have to fight for space. I rented a better apartment after a year, something brighter and bigger, with walls I painted myself and furniture I chose because it reflected who I was becoming. Sometimes, late at night, I would think about that graduation day, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet acceptance. If they had shown up, maybe I would never have left. Maybe I would have stayed stuck in a life that kept shrinking me. But their absence became the push I needed to grow into someone new, someone stronger, someone whole. It wasn't revenge yet, not in the traditional sense. It was more like healing. The revenge part came later, when they finally found me and realized what I had turned into without them. But at this stage of my journey, all I felt was a slow but steady rising inside me, a recognition that disappearing was not an escape. It was the beginning, and I was only just starting to understand how powerful that beginning would become. The moment everything truly shifted for me came almost 2 years after I disappeared, long after I had become comfortable with my new name, my new life, and the quiet stability I had built with my own hands. By then, the little cafe where I worked had become something more than a job. It had turned into a place where people actually noticed me, where regulars asked about my day, where my opinion mattered, and where I no longer felt like a shadow blending into the background. I had learned to laugh more, to speak up more, and to take pride in the smallest successes. Things I never knew how to feel when I lived with my family because everyone seemed to belong to no one. By that time, I had taken on more responsibilities at the cafe, helping the owners with inventory, planning events, and training new staff. They trusted me so much that one evening, they sat me down and asked if I wanted to manage a new branch they were planning to open. It wasn't a huge corporate job, but to me, it felt monumental. Someone finally believed in me enough to give me a chance to grow. I accepted, of course, and a few months later, the new cafe opened with me standing at the front door, welcoming customers like I had been doing it all my life. My confidence grew day by day, not through loud achievements or dramatic moments, but through steady work and quiet dedication, the kind of progress my family had never paid attention to. With the new position came better pay, and with better pay, I finally did something I had dreamed about quietly for years. I enrolled in a part-time course in business management. I wanted to learn more, to build something of my own someday, maybe even open my own cafe. For the first time in my life, my future felt like something I could shape instead of something I endured. I thought the world I had left behind had forgotten about me, and for a long time, that idea brought me comfort. But one afternoon, while I was organizing the back office and checking invoices, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something nudged me to pick up. When I answered, there was a long pause on the other end, the kind of silence that instantly tightens your chest. Then I heard my mother's voice for the first time in 2 years. She didn't sound angry or even confused. She sounded tired, like someone who had been looking for something far too long and had finally found a clue. She said my old name, the one I had shed like old skin, and asked if it was me. I didn't respond at first. I just held the phone, my heart calm in a way that surprised me. She began talking quickly then, saying they had been trying to reach me for months, that they didn't understand why I left without a word, that things had been hard at home, that my brother had faced setbacks, and that they missed me terribly. The words felt strange coming from her, as if they were lines from a script she wasn't used to reading. Then she asked the question I had always dreaded and expected all at once. Can we see you? I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just told her I would think about it and hung up before she could say anything else. For days afterward, I carried that conversation in my mind like a stone in my pocket. Always there, always felt, never fully processed. Part of me felt the old sting of the girl who once waited for their approval. Another part of me felt strangely powerful, like I was no longer tied to their expectations. I talked to no one about it, not even the cafe owners who had become like family to me. Instead, I walked through the city in the evenings, letting my thoughts untangle slowly. I kept remembering the message they had sent on my graduation day, the silence that followed, the years of being overlooked. I also remembered the freedom I earned, the strength I built, the life I created for myself. And then, unexpectedly, something inside me softened. Not for them, but for myself. I realized I didn't want to return to them as the same invisible girl they once ignored. If I were to face them again, it would be as the woman I had become, someone who didn't need their validation, someone who had carved out her own place in the world. A few weeks later, I received another call, this time from an unknown local number. When I answered, it was my brother, Noah. His voice had lost the loudness I remembered. Instead, he spoke with a mix of hesitation and forced bravado, as if he wasn't sure how to talk to me anymore. He told me our parents had been arguing a lot because of my disappearance and that the family felt broken. He said he missed me. I wasn't sure if he meant it or if it was just guilt speaking, but hearing him say the words stirred something old and complicated in my chest. He asked if he could see me, even if our parents weren't there. That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling for hours, thinking about what meeting them would mean. I didn't want a dramatic reunion. I didn't want tears or apologies that came too late. But I did want closure, not for them, but for me. The next morning, I called my mother back and told her I would meet them on my terms at a quiet cafe located on the far side of the city, a place where I felt safe, neutral, and in control. I told her I wanted no drama, no sudden emotional outbursts, no guilt tripping. She agreed to quickly, almost desperately. The day of the meeting, I dressed carefully, choosing something that made me feel grounded and confident. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I noticed how different I looked. Not just older, but stronger, calmer. I got to the cafe early, choosing a corner table where I could see the entrance clearly. My heart wasn't racing, but there was a strange stillness inside me, like the air right before a storm. When they finally walked in, my mother, my father, and Noah, I realized just how much time had passed. They looked older, smaller, almost fragile in a way I had never noticed when I lived with them. My mother's eyes scanned the room until they landed on me, and she paused as if she needed a moment to take in the person I had become. Noah looked uncertain, his confidence nowhere in sight. My father looked like he wanted to say something, but didn't know how. They approached slowly, like people stepping into unfamiliar territory. And in that quiet, something hit me sharply. They hadn't expected to find me like this. Not calm, not centered, not successful, not whole. They expected the version of me they had always known. The girl who waited for them. The girl who shrank herself. The girl who settled for crumbs. But that girl was gone. I could see the realization settle onto their faces as they took their seats across from me. And that was the moment I understood. They had no idea who I had become, and they were not prepared for the version of me sitting in front of them now. The version they had shaped unintentionally by ignoring me. The calm revenge I had been building wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simply showing them that I had grown into someone they could no longer control, no longer overlook, and no longer define. And they felt it the second they saw me. When they finally sat across from me in that quiet cafe, there was a heaviness in the air that none of us knew how to slice through at first. A silence so full that it felt like it pressed gently on my ears, reminding me that this moment had been waiting a long time to happen. My mother kept looking at me as if trying to stitch together the girl she remembered with the woman sitting in front of her, and I could see the confusion in her eyes. The realization that she no longer recognized the person I had become. My father kept shifting in his seat, clearing his throat every few seconds, like he was rehearsing words he didn't know how to form. Noah stared down at his hands, tapping his fingers against each other in a rhythm that told me he felt out of place in this unfamiliar dynamic where I no longer existed in his shadow. I gave them time to settle, breathing steadily, letting the calm inside me lead the moment because, for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one scrambling for their attention or approval, and that alone gave me a strange sense of control. My mother tried to speak first, but her voice cracked slightly and she ended up mumbling something about being happy to see me again. It sounded polite, but distant, like something someone would say at a reunion with a long-lost acquaintance. Not their daughter. I nodded slowly, not giving her more than that, because I wasn't going to rush to fill the space for them like I used to. Eventually, my father leaned forward and finally looked me straight in the eyes, and there was something almost raw in his expression when he said he didn't understand why I disappeared, that they had been hurt by it, that they had been worried something terrible happened. I let his words sit there for a moment before I answered, choosing each one carefully, not out of fear, but out of clarity. I told them I didn't disappear to punish them or cause them pain. I disappeared because living with them felt like living in a house where I was always standing behind a closed door, forgotten unless someone needed something from me. I told them the message on my graduation day didn't just hurt. It confirmed years of feeling invisible. My mother's face tightened defensively, like she wanted to argue that it wasn't true. But I didn't give her the opening. I kept speaking, gently but firmly, explaining how that message was not an isolated moment, but the final drop in a cup that had been overflowing for years. The years of missed milestones, of one-sided help, of being the backup plan in a family where someone else always took center stage. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't let anger stain my words. I spoke with the evenness of someone who had already made peace with the truth. Noah finally looked up at me when I mentioned how everything revolved around him. And for the first time in his life, he didn't look proud or smug. He looked guilty, maybe even aware. He whispered something about not realizing how hard it was for me, how he thought I liked being independent. I almost laughed at the word, but instead, I just told him he didn't have to apologize for being loved. It wasn't his fault he received attention, but it was everyone else's fault for forgetting that I needed it too. My mother wiped at her eyes, though no real tears fell, and told me they missed me terribly. But the way she said it felt more like she missed the idea of a daughter, not me specifically. So I asked her directly, calmly, if she remembered anything about my graduation speech, the professors who encouraged me, the achievements I had earned. She froze, blinking as if trying to access a memory that didn't exist. When she couldn't answer, I nodded quietly because that silence was all the truth I needed. My father tried to shift the blame to miscommunication, saying they didn't mean to hurt me, that they were busy, overwhelmed, distracted. I let him talk, but every excuse felt like an echo of the same patterns that had shaped my life with them. Everything had a reason, except me. Eventually, they asked if I wanted to come home, as if the invitation held the same weight it might have years ago. I looked at them gently and told them I had a home already, one I built myself. I wasn't angry when I said it. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. It was just the truth, spoken plainly. I told them I had a job I loved, people who valued me, a life that felt steady and whole. I wasn't the lost girl they remembered. I wasn't the daughter waiting by the door for them to notice me. I had carved out a place in the world where I didn't have to fight to exist. And seeing their expression shift, a mixture of surprise, confusion, and some kind of ache they didn't know how to name, made me realize this was the part of the revenge they never expected, the quiet revelation that I had grown without them. Noah whispered that the house wasn't the same without me, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty hearing it. I simply told him people change, families change, but absence teaches lessons presence can't. My mother asked if I changed my name because of them, her voice trembling slightly, and I answered honestly, I changed it because I needed to start over, because the name they gave me came with too much weight, to many years of feeling unseen. The shock on her face wasn't anger. It was something closer to disbelief that I had gone that far, that I had reclaimed myself completely. I didn't apologize for it. They didn't apologize either. Not properly, not fully, because apologies require understanding. And I realized they didn't understand me even now. But that was okay. I didn't come for their understanding. I came for myself. After a while, the conversation softened, drifting into quieter topics, small attempts to reconnect even though we all knew the gap between us was wide and not easily repaired. They asked about my job, my studies, my apartment, and I answered politely but without offering too much. I wasn't going to let them step back into my life casually, as if the past didn't exist. When the meeting finally ended, we all stood up slowly, unsure of what came next. My mother hesitated before reaching out to hug me, and for a second, I allowed it. Not because I wanted her comfort, but because I needed to feel physically. How much distance existed even in closeness? It felt like hugging a stranger who knew my name, but not my heart. My father placed a hand on my shoulder, awkward and uncertain, and Noah murmured a quiet "I'm glad you're okay." I gave them a small smile and walked away first, stepping out into the fresh air with a steady breath. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel shaken. I felt free. That meeting didn't close the chapter. It simply confirmed that I had rewritten the story of who I was. And the real revenge wasn't that I vanished. It was that when they finally found me, I was no longer someone they could diminish. I was no longer a forgotten daughter. I was a woman who had rebuilt herself so completely that they barely recognized me. And that was something they were utterly unprepared to face. As the days rolled into weeks, I found myself living in a strange harmony of routine and awakening, as if each sunrise peeled back another layer of numbness I had carried for far too long. And while nothing dramatic happened on the outside, something inside me was steadily, quietly rearranging itself, almost like a room being cleaned one item at a time, without anyone noticing until suddenly everything looked different. And even though I still went to work, still managed the warehouse, still dealt with the constant pressure of responsibility and the unpredictable nature of people, I moved through it all with a new steadiness, a kind of calm that didn't come from being unaffected, but from finally seeing my life through a clearer lens, realizing that the world wasn't nearly as intimidating now that I had stopped giving it control over my voice, my decisions, or my worth. I noticed it first in small moments, like how I no longer hesitated before speaking up during team meetings, how my hands didn't tremble when someone raised their tone, how I didn't twist myself into emotional knots trying to make people comfortable, even when they didn't deserve it. I simply carried myself with a quiet certainty and let my presence speak for me. It wasn't arrogance, and it wasn't coldness. It was the natural confidence that grows when fear finally steps aside and allows truth to stand in its place. But something else was changing too. Something I couldn't fully understand, yet there was a new kind of fire inside me, not loud or destructive, but steady like a slow-burning coal, the kind that doesn't fade easily, the kind that fuels you in ways you don't even notice until one day you realize you've crossed a line of strength you once thought was impossible for you. That fire pushed me to start looking more closely at the people around me, to see them not with the blurred softness of someone desperate to fit in, but with the sharp clarity of someone who understands their own story well enough to recognize who belongs in it and who never did. I saw how some coworkers, the ones who used to talk over me or treat me like an afterthought, suddenly found themselves stumbling over their words when I met their eyes without flinching. I saw how others started approaching me more respectfully, sensing a shift in the way I carried myself. People always respond to energy even when you don't announce your growth. They feel it, they sense it, and sometimes it unsettles them in ways they can't explain. But as I observed them, I also began observing myself more honestly than ever before, noticing how my own mind had transformed from a battlefield into something closer to a workshop, a place where new plans were being shaped, ideas formed, and pots redrawn. I no longer measured myself against anyone else's expectations, and I no longer feared disappointing those who had never truly invested in me to begin with. Instead, I was learning the art of choosing myself first, of protecting my peace without apology, of walking away without guilt, and of trusting my instincts when they whispered warnings I used to ignore. Yet even with all this growth, I could feel a storm brewing somewhere just beyond the horizon, a sense that the universe wasn't done testing me, that something or someone from my past would soon circle back, not to break me again, but to reveal just how far I had come and how deeply I had changed. And I wasn't wrong. One evening, while I was sorting inventory in the office after everyone else had left, the warehouse unusually quiet with only the hum of the lights and the soft echo of my footsteps, my phone buzzed with a message I hadn't expected, a name I hadn't seen pop up in months, not since the day everything began unraveling and rebuilding itself inside me. My breath caught for a second, not out of fear, but out of recognition. My past had come knocking, just as I had sensed it would. Only this time I wasn't the same person who used to shrink at the sound of certain voices or tremble when confronted by old wounds. I opened the message slowly, almost curious rather than anxious, and as I read the words simple, almost carefully chosen, I felt the calmest realization wash over me. This wasn't the beginning of another downfall, nor was it a threat to the stability I had built for myself. No, this was something different. This was an opportunity, a moment that would allow me to stand face to face with the very shadows that once held power over me, and to finally see them for what they truly were, powerless in front of who I had become. And the strangest part was how quiet I felt inside, not angry, not frightened, just ready. Ready in a way I had never been before. Ready to confront, not to fight. Ready to respond, not react. Ready to finish what had begun long ago, not with revenge born out of rage, but with the kind that grows from clarity, patience, and the steady realization that sometimes the calmest voice can be the most powerful form of justice. I didn't reply to the message immediately. Instead, I put the phone down slowly, leaned back in my chair, and let the silence of the warehouse wrap around me like a protective veil, reminding me of how far I had come from the trembling girl I once was. I breathed deeply, letting the moment settle into my bones, feeling the quiet strength that had grown inside me over these months rise steadily to the surface. And as I closed my eyes for a brief second, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever part 6 held for me, it would not break me. It would reveal me. That night, after I locked the warehouse and stepped outside into the cool air, the message still sat in my mind like a quiet echo, not loud enough to overwhelm me, but steady enough to remind me that the past had finally returned. And as I walked toward my car under the dim glow of the streetlights, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't rushing to plan. I wasn't trembling in anticipation, and I wasn't building imaginary conversations in my mind like I used to whenever someone who had hurt me resurfaced. Instead, I moved with a strange calmness, almost like my body already knew that I was prepared for whatever was coming next. I didn't check the message again until I was home, sitting on the edge of my bed with the soft hum of the ceiling fan circling above me, casting slow shadows on the walls. And when I finally opened it properly, reading each word with the full attention it demanded, I felt an odd mixture of recognition and distance, as if the person who had written those words belonged to a life I had already outgrown. The message wasn't an apology, not exactly. It wasn't an attack either. It was something in between, a careful testing of boundaries, a reaching out wrapped in politeness, but carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who wasn't sure how much access they still had to me. It said they had been thinking about everything, that they wanted to talk, that they felt they owed me clarity, though the word felt too polished for the rawness of our history. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, remembering all the storms that person had dragged me through, every careless comment, every moment I was made to feel small, every time I twisted myself into someone I barely recognized just to avoid conflict or disappointment. And yet, as the memories rose like shadows flickering in the back of my mind, I didn't feel the old pain. Instead, I felt a steady sort of strength, like I was finally standing on ground that couldn't be shaken by the weight of anyone else's intentions. I didn't reply immediately that night. Instead, I let the message sit unanswered, not out of spite, but out of respect for the version of myself who no longer jumped at the first sign of attention from someone who once made her question her worth. I wanted to choose my response with clarity, not emotion. I wanted to step into whatever was coming next with deliberate intention. And so, I placed my phone face down on the nightstand, lay back on my pillow, and let sleep come to me slowly, carrying with it the soft reminder that growth isn't loud, it's quiet, subtle, and often revealed only when life hands you a moment that used to break you, but now barely shakes you. The next morning, as sunlight spilled through the thin curtains and warmed the room, I woke up feeling unusually clear-headed, as if the air itself had shifted overnight, offering me a sense of direction that had been forming quietly in the background for months. I got ready for the day with a calm rhythm, making coffee, tying my hair back, slipping into the comfort of routine. And when I finally picked up my phone again, the message was still there, still waiting, still harmless. Instead of rushing, I typed a simple reply, "We can talk tomorrow evening." No explanations, no emotional cushioning, no unnecessary politeness, just a straightforward decision. And as soon as I hit send, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not fear, but a sense of stepping into a new chapter on my own terms. The rest of the day moved strangely smoothly, almost like the universe was clearing space for what was coming next. And even the warehouse felt different, lighter somehow, as if it sensed that a silent confrontation, years in the making, was finally beginning to take shape. The next evening, when the time came, I arrived a few minutes early to the small cafe we had chosen, a quiet place tucked between a bookstore and a row of old apartment buildings, the kind of spot where the lighting is soft and the noise low enough for conversations that matter. I chose a table near the window, sat down, and watched the world outside move in slow motion while my heartbeat stayed steady, grounded. When they finally walked in, there was a brief moment when our eyes met and something in their expression shifted, maybe surprise, maybe discomfort, maybe the sudden realization that I was no longer the version of myself they remembered. They approached cautiously, almost studying me, and when they finally sat down, they exhaled a long breath like they had been holding it since the moment they saw me. What followed wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a confrontation filled with raised voices or painful accusations. It was quiet, almost strangely gentle. They talked not with the defensive tone they used to carry, not with the casual dismissiveness that once pierced deeper than they ever realized, but with a sincerity I wasn't expecting. They said they had been thinking about the past, about the way things ended, about the things they left unsaid, about the weight of choices that had rippled into both of our lives. And as they spoke, I listened not with resentment, but with a quiet curiosity, noticing how their words no longer had the power to twist something inside me. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't rehearse, I didn't soften the truth, and I didn't sharpen it either. I simply said what needed to be said calmly, clearly, truthfully. I told them how their actions had once affected me, how I had carried the consequences in silence, how I had rebuilt myself piece by piece when I finally realized that losing them wasn't the loss I thought it was, but the beginning of my own voice emerging from the shadows. And as I spoke, I saw something flicker across their face, not guilt exactly, but understanding, maybe even regret. But that wasn't what I had come for. I hadn't come for their remorse or validation. I had come to close a chapter that had waited far too long to be finished. When the conversation ended, there were no promises, no dramatic reconciliations, no attempts to rewrite the past. We simply stood up, exchanged a final nod, and walked out of each other's lives with a kind of peace that felt like a quiet victory. And as I stepped outside into the evening air, feeling lighter than I had in years, I realized that this was my calm revenge, not revenge fueled by anger or bitterness, but by growth, by clarity, by becoming someone stronger than the person they once tried to break. This was the moment everything came full circle, not with noise, but with silence, not with chaos, but with closure. And as I walked toward my car with the soft glow of streetlights guiding my path, I knew that whatever came next in my life would be written in my own voice, shaped by my own choices, and touched by anyone who once underestimated the quiet power of my becoming.